Hello, everyone. Welcome to More Than a Muse podcast. My name is Sadie.
I'm Stauney, and happy Halloween! We're ready for all of our Halloween topics, and we're excited that you all are here to join us. And major call out to the merch. Look at
Of
us both
course, that we're
representing.
both wearing accidentally, but also I'm wearing it all the time. So the odds of this
Same.
happening increase in the month of October for sure.
We did not release this initially as October merch, but it's perfect for October. So, highly recommend. It has all of the things on it that people call women when they're angry, witches, hags, vixens, she devils, fairies, harpies, hellcats, all the things. So, it's on our
And
website.
witches, which is
Yes.
very topical for today's episode.
Mm-hmm.
Stoney, do you want to introduce our October theme and what we're going to be talking about this year?
Yes. So if you were with us for March Madness this year, we covered the Salem witch trials because that was a huge part of like people thinking women are crazy and insane and hysterical. But for October, we decided we'd talk a little bit more about the actual witch side of it all and where the whole idea of a witch comes from. And so today we'll be talking about the myths and histories of the witch itself, how it's changed over time and appears in pop culture today. And then for the rest of the month, we'll be covering people who've been accused of being witches, even though they're not.
Exactly. Yes. So I am super excited to talk about all the witches from ancient to modern and like pop culture. The witch, I think, is a very, I don't know, it captures our imagination and they show up everywhere, whether that's like in old folk tales or modern storytelling, TV shows, everything. So excited to talk about that.
I liked this little paragraph we'll start out with, but witches were perceived as evil beings by early Christians in Europe, inspiring the iconic Halloween figure. Images of witches have appeared in various forms throughout history, from evil, wart-nosed women huddling over cauldrons of boiling liquid to hag-faced, cackling beings riding through the sky on brooms wearing pointy hats. In pop culture, the witch has been portrayed as a benevolent, nose-twitching suburban housewife, an awkward teenager learning to control her powers, and a trio of charmed sisters battling the forces of evil. The real history of witches, however, is dark and often, for the witches, deadly, as you can imagine.
Like I said, we've already talked about the Salem witch trials, and so that episode is definitely there to check out. And I'm actually going to Salem this week. I'm very excited. We'll be doing a Boston trip, going to go up to Salem for the day. So I'm very excited for that. But yeah, just a tragic, weird thing that happened in American history, and not just in America, actually. There's different parts of the world where this happened, where lots of people died because of this.
Yeah.
Like you just said, is that unfortunately it is a deadly history. And it's not because there were real witches killing everyone. It was because there were people that were killing the witches.
Strange fascination that society has with women and anything different from the ordinary, which we'll get into.
And how do we label that? Exactly.
Yes.
So, as far as like the ancient roots of witchcraft, it's not super clear when they came on the historical scene. But one of the very earliest records of a witch is in the Bible, in the book of First Samuel's. That was thought to be written between 931 BC, maybe 721 BC. And it tells the story of when King Samuel sought the witch of Endor to summon the dead prophet Samuel's spirit to help him defeat the Philistine army. The witch roused Samuel and then prophesied the death of Saul and his sons. The next day, according to the Bible, Saul's sons died in battle, and so Saul committed suicide. Another Old Testament verse condemned witches, such as there's an Exodus 22:18, which says, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live," which I wonder if that was something that was used as a weapon.
100%. Yeah, I can totally see that in Puritan Salem, where they're like, oh, I'm sorry, it says in the Bible we can't let you live.
Thou shalt not let a witch live. And additional biblical passages caution against divination, chanting, or using witches to contact the dead. Long before witchcraft was a fixed crime or label, ancient Near Eastern and Mediterranean cultures treated magical, medicinal, and divinatory practices as very deeply interwoven with religion, healing, and ritual. In Mesopotamia, for example, the Akkadian term kipsu, which is translated to witchcraft, referred not only to harmful sorcery, but also to malevolent influence that could afflict a person and must be ritually removed. Philosophici, the specialists called asipu, or sometimes masmasu, functioned as exorcists, ritual healers, omen interpreters, and mediators between gods, demons, and people. And They occupied the role that we might today call like a priest, basically, combining diagnosis, ritual intervention, and incantation and herbal remedies. In the Greek Roman world, the figure of the witch was more of a mythic, literary, but still had a lot of authority over nature, life, death, and knowledge. The goddess Hecate already tested in Hesiod's Theogony that came to be invoked as a patroness of witches, crossroads, ghosts, and magic. Her association with night, boundaries, and liminal power made her a natural emblem for those who trafficked in hidden or transitional knowledge. In Latin poetry, Horace's infamous Canidia is a vivid fictional witch or Lamia, whose malevolent magic, curses, and love potions embody the anxieties in elite Roman culture about female power, poison, and boundary crossing. Again, I feel like whenever there's anything with boundary crossing and people not like doing what society says is good and right, that's where you're going to see myths of witches, which is interesting. That's something that is a thread that connects all these cultures. What links Mesopotamian and Greco-Roman quote-unquote witches is the porous boundary, which that ancient people did not sharply divide medicine from magic or religion. Midwives, herbalists, folk healers, and diviners often overlapped. Women could specialize in childbirth, dreams, or herbs and still be suspected and even praised for their occult power. In many societies, the same gestures, amulets, and incantations and plant lore used for healing could, in a different context, be employed for cursing or divination. In effect, the witch was not, in ancient understanding, a distinct profession, but one on the spectrum where knowledge of nature, hidden forces, and ritual intervention converged. So I almost feel like it's like, oh, if you use these powers for good, yay, thank you so much. If they feel like you're not doing it right and good and you're crossing certain boundaries, boo, you're a witch. Because a lot of these things are things you already associate with witches and Wicca, which is herbs, natural plant healing, that kind of stuff. I think even now is the stuff that we would maybe associate with witches, even though
Definitely.
there's places for that, of course, now.
It almost feels like the minute a woman is getting like too much power or knowledge, also, it becomes like a problem. Like they're
Yeah,
like, oh,
interesting.
like it's okay, but if she has the power of love potions and healing and childbirth, and then it's not okay
Mm-hmm.
anymore because then she's reaching into territories that we can't control, and that's like outside of what we think a
Interesting.
woman should be able to do. Weird how it becomes, even from the beginning, like such a vilified figure, even with praise in there as well. And then of course
Absolutely.
we've got the European witch craze, which we won't
Yes.
talk a ton about because obviously we've covered it. But we have High Middle Ages onward. You have Christian authorities as Christianity is rising, increasingly framed heterodoxy and popular magic as a diabolical conspiracy, reading them through the lens of Satan worship and heresy instead of, whatever they had been used for before. This actually set the stage for the Malus Maleficarum, I think is how you say it, in 1486, which was a Dominican manual that systemized the satanic witch stereotype: female coded, sexually suspect, and in league with the devil, which would help furnish prosecutors and preachers with arguments and procedures for identifying, trying, and punishing witches.
Mm.
It's translated as the hammer of the witches and is basically just a guide on how to identify, hunt, and interrogate all of the witches so that they could find them. And for over 100 years, the book actually sold more copies than any other book in Europe other than the Bible, which
Crazy.
is insane because the Bible is still a bestseller, but no one is buying this
Yeah.
book anymore.
Yeah. This one has waned in popularity. Thank goodness.
Yeah, thank heavens. And in early modern Europe, prosecutions surge, especially in fragmented German lands, often called the heartland of the witch craze, which is something we did talk about in our Salem episode, even though Salem, Massachusetts here is known for its witch craze, and that's probably the most popular one that happened in the United States. It actually was very small compared to what was happening over in Europe with the witch craze and how much crazier it was over there due to like religious political tension, poor harvests, and social stress that caused a lot of issues that would cause a lot of people to start accusing their neighbors of witchcraft. So a lot more people died over in Europe than ever did in the United States from witchcraft accusations.
Yeah, which is interesting. and very sad.
And sad, yeah.
Diving into some myths and like realities then of witchcraft, because I feel like there's so many tropes. Like you talked about them at the beginning, right? The witch
Mm-hmm.
with the long crooked nose, warts, brewing her potions on a broomstick with her black cat. Like it's become a very ideal Halloween figure here. But, and most familiar tropes about witches are more literary and folkloric than actually historical. For example, the image of a witch astride a broomstick, which was likely came about in the late Middle Ages and early modern period. Some scholars suggest that the broomstick flight drew on two different ideas. One was the flying ointments, which was salves with hallucinogenic herbs allegedly used by accused witches to induce visions of ecstasy. And two, a fertility or ritual dances involving poles, pitchforks, or broom like sticks under moonlight. So, like, those two things combined to make that they fly on their brooms. Their 15th century case of Guillaume Edelin, who's a cleric, yielded what is sometimes taken as the first confession of broom riding, where, and then after that, the broom hence became a vehicle in witch lore, even though obviously that's not a thing. And again, we talked about it when we did the Salem witch trials. Like oftentimes these confessions they're not true confessions,
No.
actually. They were very
Yeah.
coerced. And yes, so just because someone admitted to it.
But even thinking about that, the confession just seems so laughable. Like, confessing of what?
Yeah.
Riding a broom? What do you mean you rode a broom? Like, people don't
Yeah.
fly? What are you
Exactly.
talking about? Yeah.
These flying ointments were alleged concoctions containing tropane alkaloid plants like henbane, mandrake, belladonna, or datura. These plants can produce, like I said, delirium or hallucinogens, and some demonologists claim that witches anointed their bodies or even used the broomstick as an applicator to fly to nocturnal Sabbaths under demonic guidance. Very intense. And then over time, the popular lore added that cats, especially black cats, as familiar or shape-shifting companions of witches. The black cat motif comes partly from associations of nocturnal animals with occult agency. And in Christian demonological texts, the cat was sometimes imagined as a demonic companion or familiar. So I just think that's interesting. Somehow the cat became involved. And I think just all in
Yes.
all, it was like seen as like a demonic creature and associated with that. So then eventually it became a part of
It's
the witch's
also
lore.
something that has become so associated with like femininity, and like
I was
we've
just going to
talked about
say,
it.
it is interesting that
Yeah.
is often associated with an animal associated with femininity.
Yes,
Very
as well
interesting.
as on their own way. There's a book I think it's called Black Cats. I'll have to find it, where she just dives into just like cats and women and why women have been associated with cats for so long, and like the symbol of that and everything, which I think we might have to do a future episode on, because that is such a fascinating thing that the cat and
Yeah.
women are like so intertwined.
Even just like the crazy old cat lady, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're so intertwined. Cauldrons in witch imagery are derived from the fact that everyday communities use cooking cauldrons or pots for preparing food, brews, and these herbal infusions. But over time, folklore cast the cauldron as the witch's pot for stirring their potions, poisons, or magical mixtures, amplifying the idea that witches meddled in chemical or botanical powers. Because cauldrons were just household items, the leap to supernatural association is maybe less radical than it appears, because this cauldron became a symbol of hidden transformation. But together, the broom, the ointment, the cat, the cauldron, they really just created this visual of what a witch was in popular lore long before really like elements matched real practices at any given time or region. So I think that like the mythology surrounding witches and what they were traveled faster like in between villages and everything than actually it would have happened there organically. Like we talked about, those witchcraft accusations tended to follow predictable social patterns across Europe and colonial America. The bulk of them were women who were older, widowed, single, or socially marginal, or lacked powerful protectors, or were contentious social positions, which is what we talked about a lot. Some regional studies emphasize that accusations also targeted healers, midwives, or herbalists, or women who practiced folk remedies or divination, because their knowledge of these things, plants, fertility, life, and death, what they believe to blur that boundary between benevolent and malevolent magic, like we've talked about. Yeah, just so much like othering. And we also talked about this too, that it was in times a lot of social crisis like plague, famine, warfare, economic stress, that they would often sought these scapegoats, which were these witches that maybe they could blame, and they just provided convenient targets for them when the misfortune in their lives needed explanation. In parts of Germany, for example, chronic disasters in agrarian communities were followed by witch persecutions, in which entire villages turned on those they deemed witches. The logic was, if the harvest failed or if livestock died or disease spread, someone must have caused it by spiritual or diabolical means. And then this witch panic function as a way to externalize the anxiety that they were facing as a community. And yeah, it's just sad and interesting how these, I don't know, the lore traveled so quickly between
so fast.
These different communities. It's crazy.
And the fact that it became so prevalent that it's like long lasting into today. Like, what? We're still talking about witches, and they still carry a lot of those same tropes and like everything, like very prevalent form of folklore. Speaking of witches, let's talk about a few ancient witches that are the most famous. Cool. One of the most famous in Virginia's history is Grace Sherwood, whose neighbors alleged that she killed their pigs and hexed their cotton. Other accusations followed, and she was brought to trial in 1706. The court decided to use a controversial water test to determine her guilt or innocence. So her arms and legs were bound, and she was thrown into a body of water. It was thought that if she sank, she was innocent, and if she floated, she was guilty, which is dumb because people float. That's natural. So
interesting.
Yeah, I don't know how that would be a thing. But anyway, she didn't sink, so she was convicted of being a witch. But she wasn't killed. She was just put in prison for 8 years. And that was one of the first of the famous witches in Virginia. The rest of these, however, are a little bit more, what should I say? More foundational in the occult space. So maybe more witches rather than just people accused of by their neighbors. We've got Monica Saju, who was Swedish-born, British-based artist, writer, and radical ecofeminist, whose work played a significant role in the goddess movement and contemporary spiritual feminism. She created visionary symbolic paintings, wrote on earth, spirituality, the sacred feminine, and the reclamation of earlier non-patriarchal mythic forms. She often spoke of her writing and art as magical acts of respelling the world, seeking to reconnect modern consciousness with pre-Christian, animalistic, and matriarchal traditions. In her manifestos and visual work, she merged feminist critique with mysticism, blending cosmic symbolism, goddess archetypes, and nature imagery to challenge patriarchal religious structures. So she's not considered an ancient magician in the historical sense, but she's often invoked with modern occult feminist spiritual histories as a bridge between ancient forms of religious power for women and contemporary re-enchantment. Cool. And she actually died in 2005, so not that long ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is insane when you think about it. And then Helena Petrovna Blavinsky. Madame Blavinsky is her common name, which I've definitely heard before. Was a foundational figure in 19th century occult renaissance, co-founding the Theosophical Society and authoring works such as Isis Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine, which proposed a system of ancient wisdom underlying all religions. She claims to have been in contact with spiritual adepts like the Mahamas, or masters, who guided her in esoteric knowledge and attempted to synthesize Western esoteric traditions with Eastern or Hindu and Buddhist cosmetologies and metaphysics. She leaned on occult hermeneutics, emphasized intuitive insight, intonation, mythic reinterpretation, and correspondences as above, so below, rather than literal empirical claims. She's often been criticized of plagiarism, forgery of paranormal phenomena, and contradictory biographical claims. She also, I think, was, because she was a co-founder of the Theosophical Society, that was the society that I believe Helma af Klint belonged to, where she believed she was communicating with the masters to interpret her paintings.
Yeah.
So very cool. Maria Sabina is next. She was a healer in the mountains of Ioxa, Mexico, renowned for her ritual use of mushrooms in healing and visionary ceremonies. In her tradition, she invoked the little saints, or the little mushrooms, in sacred ceremonies combining song, shamanic presence, intuition, relational knowing, and deep connection with local cosmology. Her ceremonies were primarily for illness, divination, and spiritual insight, not for spectacle. But when the Western world discovered her, initially in Life magazine, she became known as a psychedelic shaman, often in tension with local expectations and exploitative outsiders. She didn't identify as a witch in the Western sense herself, but her role as a marginal, powerful woman healer who mediated invisible realms made her a compelling figure in modern occult feminist reimaginings. And last we have Enhuduena, I think is how you would say it, who was a Sumerian high priestess of the moon god Nana et appointed as a part of a political religious strategy to unifize the Akkadian and Sumerian cults. She is celebrated as the earliest known named author in history, including several Sumerian hymns, including the exaltation of Enuma and temple hymns are attributed to her, some of them in first-person voice, along with personal and political dimensions. Her writings reveal consciousness of her own identity, her authority, her relationship with divine powers. In one hymn, she laments exile, conflict over her temple, and reclaims her status. Her role was not magic in the folkloric or witchcraft sense, but she operated at the intersection of ritual, poetry, theology, politics, and priestly power, a paradigm for how in ancient societies religious and symbolic authority were bound with governance, knowledge, and control of the sacred. So there you go. We've got the very first author in history being a woman.
Who was a witch, potentially. Yep. Interesting. Love that. All right. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about witches and folklore in literature, which first I'm going to touch on the fairy tale archetypes here. In European folklore, witches were often functioned as guardians in some way, both terrifying and wise, maybe punishers, sometimes helpers, that symbolize nature's danger, but also the wisdom. One of the most enduring figures is Baba Yaga, who is the witch of Slavic tales who dwells in a hut on chicken legs, flying in a modar and pestle and controlling forest spirits. Unlike the purely evil villains of different tales, Baba Yaga embodies duality. She may devour the foolish but aid the brave and the clever. Scholars like Andreas Johns, that has one that says Baba Yaga, the ambiguous mother and witch of the Russian folktale, interpreted her as a remnant of pre-Christian goddess or earth mother figures, part death crone, part life giver, rooted in cycles of fertility and decay. So, interesting thing. By contrast, though, the Witch of Hansel and Gretel, that was recorded by the Brothers Grimm in 1812, marks a shift towards moralized depictions of female power. She is a cannibalistic crone, luring children with sweets and punished by fire, symbolizing anxieties about hunger, domestic safety, and the dangerous independence of women outside family and community structures. The Candy House, which is a dream of abundance, turned trap, reflected both economic hardship and religious warnings against temptation. These fairy tale witches crystallized the early modern imagination fusion of the supernatural, feminine, and then, of course, forbidden appetites.
It's interesting to think about how that even switches in other fairy tales. Like I'm thinking about like Snow White and Sleeping Beauty, and how you've got more like beautiful, deadly kind of forms of witches that are powerful and in a whole other way. And then like even in Snow White, she turns into the old crone that gives the apple.
Yeah.
And, like it's just crazy like how many different imaginations there are of like these different figures of a witch practically in every single fairy tale.
Truly. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Another example of witches in Shakespeare's Macbeth. Shakespeare introduced the Weird Sisters in Macbeth, which was a play from 1606. He tapped into both folk witchcraft and Renaissance occultism. Using the witches to personify fate, chaos, and moral ambiguity, the word weird derives from word, W-Y-R-D. I don't know how the enunciations are different on that, but Old English for destiny, which I think is interesting, underscoring their role as instruments or preordained tragedy. Incantations, double toil and trouble, combine classical references to the fates and the Hecate cult with the contemporary imagery of English witch trials. In Shakespeare's time, King James I had recently published Daemonology, which was a treatise affirming belief in witchcraft and demonic pacts, and the playwright likely drew on those cultural fears to flatter royal sensibilities. But the Weird Sisters are more than just the villains, because they actually are there to expose Macbeth's ambition and moral weakness, suggesting that the true corruption lies within human nature and human desire. And this ambiguity, whether witches command events or simply mirror them, made Macbeth a turning point in how witchcraft symbolized psychological and political conflict rather than mere superstition. Which, I mean, shout out to Shakespeare for making it more complicated, but I think that's such a good point. The point of the story of Macbeth is not that the Weird Sisters and those witches are actually controlling everything, but rather they are just giving Macbeth exactly what he wants to hear, and then he then responds accordingly. So I think that's super interesting. Continuing with Romantic and Gothic revivals, by the late 18th century, the Enlightenment's rationalism gave rise to a counter movement, which was Romanticism, which celebrated mystery, intuition, and nature's sublime power. In this era, witches and sorcerers were reimagined not as demonic villains, but as tragic rebels or embodiments of lost ancient wisdom. Poets like Samuel Taylor Coleridge and Percy Shelley referenced magical women as symbols of intuition and rebellion against modern constraint. Gothic novels such as Matthew Lewis's The Monk and Charles Matrin's Melmoth the Wanderer invoked sorcery and the supernatural to explore sin, desire, and female transgression. The Gothic witch evolved into the femme fatale of the 19th century literature. It was seductive, intelligent, and threatening to patriarchal order. Victorian fascination with spiritualism, seances, and the occult, which was like paralleled by real-world movements of theosophy, blurred the boundaries between fiction and esoteric belief. By century's end, witches had transformed from rustic hags into complex figures, sometimes the monstrous other, sometimes the misunderstood visionary. This Romantic and Gothic rehabilitation paved the way for 20th century reinterpretations of witches as feminist icons, nature priestesses, and agents of self-knowledge rather than evil. So I thought that was a super cool thing. It's like with that rise of spiritualism, and I don't know, I think the Victorian world just liked dark things. So it makes sense that
They
they were like,
did.
wait, but witches are cool. Why are we mad at
Yeah,
witches? Like, it actually seems pretty consistent that it was this period then that made the world open up to witches maybe a little bit more.
definitely. And then that leads us into the 20th century with modern witchcraft and reclamation. It's more commonly known as Wicca, which is considered the foundational movement of contemporary pagan witchcraft. It emerged publicly in 1950s England under the influence of Gerald B. Gardner, who claimed that he had been initiated into a surviving old religion of witchcraft. Though most historians now date the literal continuity of such a line, he drew from ceremonial magic, theosophy, Rosicrucianism.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think you did great.
Thank you. And a folklore to craft a system combining ritual, ethics, seasonal festivals, and duotheistic cosmology between goddess and god. Wiccans avoid evil and the appearance of evil at all costs. Their motto is to harm none, and they strive to live a peaceful, tolerant, and balanced life in tune with nature and humanity. Many modern-day witches still perform witchcraft, but there's seldom anything sinister about it. Their spells and incantations are often derived from their Book of Shadows, which was a 20th century collection of wisdom and witchcraft, and can be compared to the act of prayer in other religions. A modern-day witchcraft potion is more likely to be an herbal remedy for the flu instead of a hex to harm someone, which was popularized throughout the 1960s and 70s in the United States, riding the wave of counterculture. Can you imagine a better time for Wicca to become popular than in the 60s and 70s?
Literally, yes.
Especially with like ecological consciousness, spiritual exploration. Then during that time, there were a lot of variants and offshoots that came about. You have Dianic Wicca, which was exclusively female worship and feminist spirituality, Alexandrian Wicca, and fairy tradition, each with distinct ritual emphases, pantheons, and structures. One especially influential strand of reconnecting witchcraft with activism is the reclaiming tradition, which was founded in 1979 by Starhawk and Diane Baker in San Francisco area, which combines pagan ritual with feminist, environmental, and social justice ideals. Its symbol, the spiral, appears in The Spiral Dance, which was a book that became a touchstone text for many modern witches. Over time, Wicca's public profile grew through books, magazines, pagan federations, legal recognition, and it influenced other neo-pagan paths like Druidry, heathenry, and eclectic witchcraft. Historians emphasize that many contemporary witches are not Wiccan, which now functions as a broader umbrella term for magic, reconstructivist, eclectic, and syncretic practices. There are a lot of big words involved in witchcraft.
Totally.
But yeah, and that's what's more common today, I think. And that's a lot of like moon water and charging crystals and like herbal remedies and recognizing pagan holidays, which is actually fun and I think should be done more often. Like we should be celebrating
Totally.
like the midsummer solstice and everything. Like why not? That's way more fun
Absolutely.
than not having an extra holiday.
So valid. I think it's cool the different ways that like the witch has turned into being a feminist icon. And I think that's the most powerful transformation in this modern era is how the witch has been reclaimed as symbols, which is shout out again to our merch is all about what we're doing here. It's the myths of madness. We're reclaiming these things. But it's become a symbol of female autonomy, resistance, and spiritual agency. During the late 1960s and 70s, the feminist movement began to draw upon the witch as a metaphor. For instance, the radical feminist performing collective WITCH, which is Women's International Terrorist Conspiracy from Hell, staged provocative hexes and theatrical protest, for example, gluing the doors of the New York Stock Exchange shut to shock the public and to underscore the ideas of systemic oppression.
Love
Hilarious.
to hear it. It also
I
reminds me of the
know.
song Woman in Total Control of Herself, which gotta love
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Absolutely. In spiritual feminist circles, practices emerged that centered goddess worship, witchcraft, and reclamation of ancestral female spirituality. You already touched on Sana Budapest and Dianic Wicca is a prime example. It was positioned the witch not as a demonized outcast, but as a priestess of the divine feminine. And this ritual practice and political activism, they definitely wove together. Magic is inseparable from social justice, ecological awareness, and like I said, this feminist solidarity. In the late 20th and early 20th centuries, the feminist witch image migrated into pop culture a whole lot, where they became powerful characters in literature, film, and television. And I know we'll talk about those in a little bit here, but they're often figures of resistance, subversion, or healing. In horror and fantasy, there's been a trend towards recentering the witch as a protagonist rather than a villain, which has reshaped the archetype. And I think even in social media here, where they're amplified, we've got platforms like TikTok, where of course there's like the witch aesthetic, but also witch talk, which is of Instagram, that combine herbalism, astrology, tarot, self-care rituals, and eco-spiritual language. Many of these users frame witchcraft as a pathway to empowerment, decolonial spirituality, and alternative healing. Some feminist, queer, and intersectional witches actively reclaim this term as a badge of resistance. And so I think that an interesting thing is like this modern witchcraft is like simultaneously like a living religious practice in ways, but it's also like feminist reclamation and a cultural symbol. And yeah, I think it's super interesting how that's even continued today.
And like you said, pop culture is full
Yeah.
of an abundance of witches. There's a lot of different archetypes it'll follow. So you have like villain to misunderstood heroine. Like you've got The Wizard of Oz, which had one of the most iconic visual templates for witchcraft in modern memory, the green skin, pointed hat, broomstick, and the cackle. You have that lingering medieval archetype. But then next to that, you also have Glinda, the good witch, kind of showing the good and wicked dividing between the 20th century mental shift towards moral ambiguity rather than pure evil. So like they had wicked witches, but they also had good witches, and the good witches were pretty and the bad witches were ugly, and kind of that divide. But then you also have a century later Wicked, which we'll be talking about next month. How could we not? So we'll have a Wicked episode. But you've got Wicked that then turned that and retold the story through Alphaba's eyes, recasting her as an activist and outcast misunderstood by a corrupt society. So then it turns her into the symbol of moral conviction, female resistance, and otherness, a feminist reinterpretation of a scapegoated woman who was blamed for all of the things that went wrong in her society. And she's no longer monstrous, but persecuted for her power. And I even think of Maleficent, like the retelling of that, and just how we're having this abundance of stories where the villain is no longer as much of a villain anymore. Then you've got empowered sisterhoods like Sabrina, Charmed, and Practical Magic. this just reminds me of the 90s 100%, with
So
witches
true.
evolving into heroines, part domestic fantasy, part feminist allegory. You've got Sabrina the Teenage Witch, which was presented magic as a metaphor for coming of age, identity, and moral autonomy. The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina was the reimagining, which leaned a little darker. But she literally challenges the devil in that one, which is why I ended up not being able to watch that show, because it felt a little too insane
Too
when you
dark?
were watching.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were like watching people summon Satan on the TV. And I was like, I don't think I should be like listening to this set out loud. Like, it feels a little.
That's so funny, actually. But I get it. That's why I don't like watching movies with like demons or like that have a spiritual connection to it, or even like a religious. Like, I'm too superstitious. I'm like, I don't need to listen to a priest do a seance. Like, I'm good. I don't know what that could welcome into my home. I'm okay.
Well, at least the seance is like getting rid of something.
True,
whereas like this, they were literally like summoning Satan in one of the episodes, and I was like, I'm down.
Watch this. Yeah. What if it's real? I don't want to mess with that. I so agree with you, actually.
Yeah. Whereas you have Charmed. Have you ever seen Charmed?
No, actually. I feel like I need to see it.
It's cute. It reframed witchcraft as a story of female lineage and sisterhood. They have the Hollowell sisters, the power of three, that use the power to get rid of evil magic. They go around doing good. It's very like Buffy the Vampire Slayer if Buffy was also a vampire and just like fighting all of the evil vampires.
Fun.
But it's cute. Then you also have practical magic, adapted from Alice Hoffman's novel, that further softened witch imagery into romantic realism, depicting generations of women who balance enchantment and trauma while living as outsiders. These witches heal, love, and survive, and their stories about reclaiming softness as strength. You even have VVitched and a lot of those where you can see the idea of a witch becoming a lot more of just like a soft, feminine, magical thing that can even be used in a humorous way. Then you have the dark feminine returning through like American Horror Story and The Witch, or the VVitch, however you want to say it, because it's VVITH. The pendulum swung towards gothic reclamation, which is as embodiments of rage, trauma, and survival. You've got American Horror Story Coven in 2013, blending horror, camp, and feminist myth-making. The show's characters are descendants of Salem witches, voodoo priestesses, and social outcasts, and they mirror the powerful mosaic of womanhood today. And then you also have Robert Eggers' The Witch, which reclaimed kind of the witch myth within its original Puritan setting, but reflames it through feminist horror. The film's protagonist, Thomasin, enters religious repression, and then they have this outbreak where her family starts accusing the kids of being involved in witchcraft because they're so religious, and then it comes into this whole like new awakening of a coming of age story disguised as horror. A very good movie. And so across the 20th and 21st centuries, witches have morphed from monsters to metaphors for power, trauma, sisterhood, rebellion, and identity. So in earlier media, they embodied fears of the patriarchy. Today, they represent the fantasies of liberation and kind of the liberation of womanhood in general. So it's showing a lot of different things like activism, defiance, liberation, evolving relationship to feminine power, and all of the things that we now celebrate about women today.
Absolutely. And I think there's some pretty cool, just like enduring symbolism here. We talked about broomstick, cauldrons, covens, but I think it is pointed out that like the broom has become a symbol of mobility, which is the right to move beyond prescribed roles to claim agency. The coven has been maybe redefined as basically just like creating communities of solidarity, women's liberation. But then also like her cat, her toad, or crow has shifted from like a symbol of alliance to like of independence and intuition, and that they can be aligned with natural things and unseen things. And of course, like you mentioned, like the witch's evolution from the feared heretic to a feminist hero reflects that deeper cultural alchemy, which is a transformation of shame into power, from silence into storytelling, exile into belonging, which I think is cool how you can see that through the way that the stories of witches has changed over time. I also think about just like that classic like feminist saying, which I think is from the 1970s, which is, "We are the granddaughters of the witches you couldn't burn." And I think that's just a really powerful example of that reclamation here of what witches are, and also just like how enduring the consequence of doing that so long ago, and how many people resonated with that, where it's anyone who feels like an other, anyone who feels like they are a woman and slightly different from what they should be as a woman, how it's turned into something that there can be solace and belonging in. And I think that's very beautiful.
It does feel like every woman has some sort of connection with the idea of
Yeah,
a witch.
I think so
Something
too.
about it, yeah, it just feels, oh yeah, like that's my connection to women of history, is that, and all of that. And then it's like there's something magical about us that's like terrifying to men, and in a way that
Totally.
like makes you feel powerful, because you're just like, ha, they couldn't get rid of us. So,
Yeah. And
yeah.
even in just like the small ways, like I'm not one who's like majorly against big pharma. We love taking our
Mm-hmm.
medicine. Like any person who's, oh, I'm actually going to look for a natural remedy over just taking
Mm-hmm.
medicine. Like in a way, I'm like, that is so rooted in like witchcraft. And so it's like
Yes.
anytime, and there's so many things that it's like fighting against or doing anything against mainstream or against what an authority tells you to do. There is a witch tie in there. And I think
Well,
that's very interesting.
yeah, I think I'm glad you brought up health, because I think that's such a major thing too, with like women's health being so understudied
Yeah.
in a lot of like major areas of
That a
medicine.
lot of it's
That,
fine. I'll take care of it myself.
yes, or oh, I'll go see like a hormone specialist, like seek out alternative forms of medicine that in previous eras would have been considered witchcraft, but now it's necessary for us to find a way in the world that's not built for you.
Very true. No, that's such a good
Yeah.
point. I didn't think about, because
Mm,
there's so much like functional medicine that I think is
yeah.
becoming more and more talked about as, yeah, more and more women. I think I know you have experienced this too, of like not getting to find the answers that you need directly from a doctor. And so it's okay, cool, let me get creative then. And then able to help yourself afterwards, which is
It's
amazing.
insane. Like PSA, when you go to a regular doctor and ask them to test your hormones, and they say that they don't test all of your hormones. They don't look
Mhm.
unless you specifically ask them to, because it's expensive. And so they don't do it. So it's actually like messed up that in order to get all of your hormones tested, you have to go and see an alternative doctor. Like, it's crazy the level that it has to go to sometimes in order to find your way. Yeah,
Yeah.
insane. So it makes
Yeah.
sense that we all have a connection with this like figure of a witch. And
Absolutely. No, I think it's
yeah.
very powerful. It makes sense that it has become this like feminist icon over time.
Mhm.
Of course. Of course. Like you
Yeah.
said, we're all witches in our way,
And
which is
also just like
beautiful.
the vilifying of the independent woman or an elderly woman, or like I think
Hmm.
all of us feel a
Even as
connection to
like a
that in some way.
wise woman. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Like that's
She's
crazy.
wise, alone, and independent, and can make her own way in the world. And for some reason, that's just absolutely terrifying. And that's
Yeah.
funny. So,
Truly. Oh
yeah.
man. Yeah, no, I love how like I feel like this became such an inspiring topic to learn more about. And not that I wasn't expecting to, but I was almost like, oh, this is like a Halloween fun little topic. And then by the end of reading all this, I'm like, oh wow. We
Yeah.
are the daughters of the witches they couldn't burn. As
No.
cheesy as that is.
Yeah, I hate that became such a cheesy sentence, because it really is powerful if you think about it.
Yeah,
Like,
agreed.
yeah, you're like, we are the women that ended up surviving all of that. Like, made it through so
Totally.
many years of persecution and everything else. And then it's, we're here and we have rights.
Yeah. No, I agree. I remember
So,
the first time I heard that phrase, I was like, whoa, excellent, mind blown. And now it's,
mhm.
yeah, I know it's become a little cheesy, whatever, but
Yeah.
boo on that. I think it's fun. I think it's a
Yes,
great
definitely.
saying.
Cool.
Anyways,
Well,
yeah, that's witches. Thanks for joining us for our first episode of October. We have a couple more coming up, just different branches of witches and different
mhm.
times that women have been accused of being witches. And I don't know, maybe they were witches. I guess
Maybe they were.
maybe
I'm
we can
actually
decide.
very excited about it, because we've talked about like the Salem accusations of witchcraft. This is
Mm-hmm.
different. We're not talking about that. We're talking about like modern satanic panic, kind of being
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, those women over there are involved in something. What if they're witches?
What
And
if
no
they
one like,
are?
yeah, and they didn't end up getting persecuted or killed for it. Just a little bit of mysticism surrounding some people.
Totally.
So very fun.
Absolutely. I'm excited to learn more about it. Well, join us next week. Go check out our website for our merch, or if you're on TikTok, we have it
Yes.
available on our TikTok shop if that's like a preferred way of shopping. And we'll be back next Monday.
Yes, we will.
Bye.
Bye.